Alright, so Deontay Wilder versus Joseph Parker. This is kind of the fallout. Now, we obviously all know we have a bit of time off over Christmas, so we make the most of that. We look over a few things that happened in the world of boxing over the last few days. And I went, and obviously when I watched that fight, Wilder versus Parker, not compelling viewing to say the least, but I watched that with the commentary off. Because obviously we're doing a watch along, can't have the commentary in the background. So I went back and I rewatched it again. And again, still not the easiest fight in the world to watch. It was not compelling viewing to say the least. But when I watched that fight back, obviously the lack of timing from Deontay Wilder, the lack of real urgency there. But the guy in the corner, Malik Scott, I mean, Malik Scott, for those who don't know, when he was competing, and obviously he competed in the heavyweight division, he actually was stopped by Deontay Wilder in a round. I think that might have been on the might have been, I actually can't remember. It was on the undercard of Danny Garcia versus Herrera, I think it was. He fought Deontay Wilder in a final eliminator for the WBC title. He lost that fight in a round. He also lost to Derek Chisora and against Luis Ortiz on a Monaco show in a fight in which he was extremely negative. It was an awful fight, really, really bad fight. But Malik Scott in his whole career was basically him being negative and, just kind of moving around the ring. Not really, he was never a big puncher either. I don't think he only had about 10 or 12 knockouts. It was a very low amount of knockouts. He wasn't a puncher. He wasn't an elite heavyweight. He was just a really awkward, negative type of fighter. And obviously, he's only been in Team Wilder for the last two fights. So he came into Team Wilder after Deontay Wilder fired Mark Breland after the second Fury fight because, well, Mark Breland was a double agent. He was in on a conspiracy, this, that, and the other. All this nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And Mark Breland, I feel bad for him because all he did on that night was have his fighter's best interest at heart. He actually did what the cornerman was supposed to do. He saw his fighter was in trouble. He knew his fighter was never going to win the fight. So to spare him any further punishment, he went in, which some cornermen are unwilling to do, which I think they should be, because if your fighter is really taking a shellacking, just pull them out. And that's exactly what he did. He threw the towel in for Deontay Wilder. Wilder accused him of all sorts of nonsense. And I do find it interesting that one of the conspiracies that they chuck at Tyson Fury is that he had egg weights in his glove or something in his glove or in his hand wrap. Well, JD's, who's been in Team Wilder since the start, he, I believe, was the guy who inspects the hand wrap and the gloves. Because when you're getting your hands taped, a representative from the opponent's team will come in. Klitschko, Vladimir, used to always send Vitali in. So you would have seen Vitali looking at Tyson Fury when he had his hand wraps getting applied. He would have been, obviously, at Wembley Stadium when Joshua was getting his done. So you're telling me that if Fury did have something illegal in his glove, that this guy didn't spot it, and yet you keep this guy in your team if he didn't spot something as blatantly obvious as that? Well, we obviously know that's a load of nonsense. It's just all those excuses were a load of nonsense. But when Malik Scott took over, it was a real kind of, what is this going to be? And to some extent, you could see kind of what was happening. He was playing to Deontay Wilder's ego, because Deontay Wilder obviously has a massive ego. And Wilder believes that he was cheated in that rematch with Tyson Fury. That Fury cheated, that there was all this shenanigans, referee, everyone was in on it. And Malik Scott played up to that. Now, some trainers in the past, Angelo Dundee is a very, very good example, they've played into their fighter's ego. So he did that many times with Muhammad Ali when he wanted Muhammad Ali, because we knew Muhammad Ali was so stubborn, especially a young Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay as he would have been known then, wouldn't do what he was told. You tell him something. I think Mark Breland did say that the Wilder was a bit like that. And how you get around that was he would basically say to Cassius Clay, oh, you're doing brilliant with that uppercut, brilliant uppercut. He wouldn't have even thrown it. But because a young Cassius Clay was so egotistic, he'd be like, oh, wow, my uppercut's good, I'm going to start throwing that more. That's how Angie Dundee would get him to do what he wanted. However, in fights, Angie Dundee, if things weren't going well, he wouldn't just, say, oh, you're doing a great job. He'd say it to them, against George Foreman. He didn't want Ali on the ropes. Thomas Hearns versus Sugar Ray Leonard won. The famous, you're blowing it, son. So although he had a very good understanding of how to get around these fighters who have a big ego and maybe won't take instructions the best, he had his way of getting around it. But when time came on fight night, if things weren't going their way, he wasn't just going to pussyfoot around and be like, "You're brilliant, son, you're brilliant." He'd just come in and say, "You're blowing it, do this." Now with Scott, I kind of got the impression, is that what it's kind of going to be like? Is it going to be a case of, all right, I'll play up to Wilder's ego, because it's a big ego. I will try and, in my own way, of teach him new things, but at the same time, when things aren't going right, I'm going to let him know. Clearly not that, because no urgency on Saturday, and Deontay Wilder seemed to think, certainly in the fight, that he was doing a master. He was pulling the Floyd Mayweather in there, completely outboxing Joseph Parker throughout. And at the end of the fight, bear in mind, I think at least one of the judges scored every single round to Joseph Parker, including a 10-8 round in there for good measure. I think it was the 8th round. He was completely schooled by Parker, completely outboxed, but yet he still raised his hand aloft at the end and believed that he was doing enough in there to win these rounds. Clearly, the fact that after 7-8 rounds, especially after he got stunned in that 8th round, there was still no urgency in there. There was no, you're behind, you need to grab the bull by the horn, you need to go, and you need to go for a knockout. At the very least, you need to drop him a couple of times. If you've lost that many rounds, there's no real way to get back into it other than that. And there was none of that. Is it a case of now that, he just is like, well, doesn't matter what I say, he'll do it his own way? Or what? Because I really don't know. I'm struggling after seeing that performance. And some people would argue, and it's a fair point, that even if Malik Scott had given Deontay Wilder the riot act, would that really have helped? Because his time and everything just seemed off. Well, yeah, I mean, that's possible. But I definitely think that if he'd have gone in there and at least, because Joseph Parker, bear in mind, right, this isn't like we're dealing with, and credit to Joseph Parker, take nothing away from him, right? Don't think I'm taking away from Parker. I'm not. But this isn't a Joseph Parker who was unbeaten, who, got that win over Andy Ruiz, who was WBO champion. This is a Joseph Parker who's lost a couple of times, and only a little over a year ago, not that long, a year and 3 months, 15 months ago, was stopped for the first time in his career in a fight where he really did take a bit of a pasting from Joe Joyce. Now, Joe Joyce, he's not on Wilder's level, you would think. And yeah, he was able to go in there and dismantle Joe Parker. Yeah, he had moments in there, rough moments, Joe Joyce, but he was able to go in there, take that and just dismantle him, hit him with one left hook, and it was over. Deontay Wilder, one of the most ferocious heavyweights we've seen, surely if he'd stepped on the gas, at the very least, he could have at least put Joe Parker in his box and really made him question everything, but he didn't. He just kept moving around that ring, throwing some inaccurate jabs, very inaccurate shots, and then whenever Joseph Parker came in, he was able to land. And it's the fact that Wilder has been pro so long, no one's ever been able to teach him basic footwork. In fact, his footwork seems to have regressed over the years. That when he's hit with shots, even if it's on the chest, his balance is so bad that it makes it look like he's hurt worse than he is. Because it's like, imagine you're standing on one leg and someone pushes you, just a little shove like that, you're going to fall back, you're going to move. Doesn't mean you're hurt, just means you're off balance. But for a judge or someone looking at that, it looks like, oh, is he hurt? And that's still not been taught to him. For me, one of the most interesting things, and this is something that maybe some people don't pick up on, is that I suspect, again, it's only my suspicion, that Breland had some sort of effect in there. Because Wilder, if you ever listened to him from a couple of years ago, maybe say 6-7 years ago, when it came to weight specifically, he used to always talk about wanting to come in heavier, to gain extra muscle. I think with the Povetkin fight, he was talking about coming in the mid-230s, thereabouts. Obviously, the Povetkin fight never happened. He ended up fighting Areola in July, because obviously Povetkin failed the test. But he never really came in any heavier with Breland than I can remember, about 230, thereabouts, right? And I suspect that's because Breland himself knew you can't be coming in any higher than that. Even that's too heavy. And he was always able to, maintain that weight in the low 220s or 2 teens. As soon as Malik Scott comes in, he comes in nearly 240. think he was 238, 239. Completely ridiculous weight for somebody of Deontay Wilder's dimensions. He just, it will not work. And in that Tyson Fury trilogy fight, what happened? He was blown after 2 rounds. And that was a fight where I genuinely believe maybe if Mark Breland had been there and Deontay Wilder had come in 215, 216, similar to what he came in on Saturday night, that I'm not necessarily saying he would have won, but I think he would have had a better chance. And he would have had a better chance of lasting, because that Wilder on that night in October was better than the Wilder in the rematch. He was just too heavy. And that Tyson Fury wasn't better than the Fury who fought in the rematch a year and a bit ago. So I think all that taken in, if we'd had a lighter Wilder, we could have, I'm not saying he would have won, but certainly it might have been a lot closer. And maybe Fury would have had to pick himself up off the canvas more than the 2 times he was. You never know. Because at the end of the day, he was still getting bullied in the clinch. So it made no difference in terms of strength. All it did was just slow him down. Didn't do anything. It's as if say, well, he was hitting harder. It's Deontay Wilder. He doesn't need to hit any harder. No, the guy is 215 pounds and he could knock any heavyweight out clean with that right hand if it lands. My guy doesn't need to put any weight on. It's not going to make a blind bit of difference to his punching power. So that's my kind of thoughts on everything. Now, Wilder has talked potentially about coming back, making one last go of it. Look, I really don't know at this point. That Joshua fight seems dead in the water as far as I'm concerned. The one thing I would wonder is the Saudis seem to have plans for worst case scenario, because when it was the build up to Fury and Ngannou, we were hearing Usyk Fury December 23rd. Right, and obviously we know it didn't happen, but no sooner did we hear that fight was kind of not done, obviously it's happening, but would be happening in 2024, that we heard about Day of Reckoning. So I'm wondering now with March the 9th, will we hear of a heavyweight extravaganza? Maybe not quite the Day of Reckoning, but will we hear names like Anthony Joshua? Will we hear names like Andy Ruiz? You know, maybe not fighting one another, but you get me, a card like that. I mean, I heard a rumour that the Saudis are looking at Bakoli versus Ruiz. I mean, that's a great fight. If it happens, that's a great fight. Bakoli versus Ruiz. Would they look to do, okay, their plan was Wilder versus Joshua March the 9th. Okay, we don't have that now, but let's do this instead. You know, these big nights of heavyweight fights. Possibly. I mean, if that was the date, that's still in Riyadh season, so maybe they'll look to do something else. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But that's my thoughts on the whole Deontay Wilder Malik Scott situation. Listen, some people like having yes men around, and obviously that is Deontay Wilder. He likes to have people who will massage his ego, who won't tell him what he needs to hear. It can work to a certain extent, but when you need it, when you need someone to actually read you the riot act, when you need someone to tell you this is what's happening, imagine you're in a medieval battle and your army is getting absolutely decimated. You can clearly see it, and one of your commanders just says, it's all good, you know, we're winning the battle, but they're getting closer. That doesn't matter. But the guys are retreating. We're still in control. Yeah, how's the army? Well, we came with 10,000. How many we leaving with 2? So did we win? No. That's literally what it's like. Just having a load of yes men and, you know, not keeping him grounded, having his head go completely all over the place. I do take into consideration some of it is Deontay Wilder just maybe not being the fighter he once was. Take that into consideration. But Malik Scott, JDs certainly don't help. They certainly don't help. And yeah, if Deontay Wilder does come back, I mean, he ain't going to change anything. And if he does, and he gets in people who will tell him, you know, this is what we're going to do, tough you know what if you don't like it, how's that going to work? You know, Mark Breland even spoke about Wilder not listening, you know. Let's wait and see. You know, Chris Eubank Jr. was kind of like that. You know, Adam Booth said that. He seems to be listening now, and he seems to be all the better for it. You know, it's not to say he'll be a world champion or anything like that, but, you know, certainly I wouldn't have thought that he would have came back from that Liam Smith fight the way he did. Came back with Bomac, listened, did what he needed to do, looked good. Maybe Deontay Wilder should take note. Let's see. I'll leave it there. Let me know your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed it, people. Smash the like button if you could. Hit subscribe, of course, as always, if you haven't already. And for now, lads and lassies, peace.